Hey guys, VM. um, oh, yeah. Welcome to the Interoperability Everywhere panel. We have Brian from ICF, Apiori / Patrick from Manoma and Namada, Ella from Cronos. So yeah, I'm really happy to moderate this panel. My name is Bora. Yeah, let's just quickly, we don't have like a lot of time, so let's just quickly go, like, introduce yourselves. Do you want to start, Ella?
Yeah, my name is Ella. I'm head of ecosystem and partnerships at Cronos. Cronos is an EVM blockchain built with Cosmos SDK. We've been up and running for almost 3 years now, and very excited to be here.
Nice. I go by Apiori on Twitter. I do a few things. My title is Head of Research Relations at Heliax. Primarily, I work on Anoma and try to communicate and interface with various folks in the ecosystem.
Hey, I'm Brian. I've been involved in Cosmos for a long time. I was part of the original Cosmos team, and I'm at the moment on the board of the Cosmos Foundation, president of the ICF, and also run Chorus One. So we run staking infrastructure and for lots and lots of different Cosmos chains.
Yeah, great. So I would just want to start with our first question. Just wanted to ask this to everyone. Just curious, to what extent do users know which chain their assets are on, and how much should they care? Just like a general question of the IBC, let's say. You want to go first, a priori?
Sure. I think Kepler does a really nice job of abstracting away the experience for users. And so when you load up the Kepler wallet, it will show you your balance. And then as long as you have, if I recall correctly, the RPC endpoints connected, you'll have it will say TIA balance, and it will say Cosmos Hub Atom balance, etc. And then you can flip to the staking tab and it will show you the same. So traditionally, like a couple of years ago when Kepler first started to get popular, around the time that Terra was popular, and Osmosis was doing a ton of volume, you had to manually switch and toggle between these things. And now it is more of an abstracted experience, and it's a little bit more seamless than using something like MetaMask, for example. So to the extent that the users know which chain that they're on in particular, it's hard to say, especially if tools like ibc.fun, become more used and prevalent. But I still think some users do want to know, because some users do have community affiliations, or they do have preferences over security trade-offs and risks. But Kepler does a nice job of at least showing you that information.
Yeah, I think it's a very hard question. I mean, today, obviously you sort of are aware, right? Okay, even in Kepler, I can then be kind of confusing for user, because now all of a sudden, if atoms, but it's on different chains, and now how do I deal with this? So, I do expect that in the long run we'll get more to the point where maybe people don't really know, but then there's also a downside to that, right? Because under the hood, who knows what's happening, and then there can be different risks associated with it. So I think that's just one of the challenges. But I'm pretty clear that in the long run, it's just, so my mother's husband is also trying to use it a little bit, and when I've tried it over and over again to explain it, and it just does not work. So I think it's really hard for users to wrap their head around that. Oh, now they have Atom, but it's on the Cosmos Hub, it's also on another chain, and I think it's super confusing, and so I think it's necessary for it to be abstracted away.
Yeah, I would say for Cronos, most of our dApps operate on the EVM layer as well as the assets. So for IBC-enabled assets, we actually built an interface for those called Cronos Bridge underneath this IBC powering net. So users can bridge in and out with native assets like Atom, Akash, I think Celestia coming up next. And then we map it to the EVM layer for the users. So users can actually use various EVM layer dApps on Cronos to do liquid staking, to do yield farming, lending, etc. So that's how we handle IBC enabled assets and map it to the EVM layer. But in general, I would say, yeah, it is pretty confusing, especially given our user base are crypto.com users who tend to be even, more newbie compared to your average Web3 users. So we spend a lot of time educating people on, different chains, the different type of assets. But I think, the biggest challenge is really like as a interface, in terms of dApps or wallet, how can you do to kind of abstract away those complexity for you? But I do agree, like echo with what Brian said, like I think in the future, there's going to be like a spectrum of different users. You have the tech-savvy users who actually want to understand the granularity, and they want to understand, what is the trust assumptions and the protocols that are powering it. But for the others, especially the users that we're serving, they don't really care that much. They just want the complexity to be abstracted away.
Yeah. Thanks for your answers, guys. I just wanted to follow up on Apiori, because I think this kind of can connect it with Sanoma doing intents. Just so, how do you imagine users expressing what chains their assets are on, and like, do you think there is like one sensible default on this?
Yes, I think that there could be a sensible default, but it would require quite a few things. I think actually like the technical implementations would be the easiest, even though we've spent a lot of time on this type of thing. I think the harder thing is coordination, both at the ecosystem level broadly, but then also at the community level socially with developers and also with researchers, right? So how do you convince people to use your software? I think that's a very difficult question. And if you look at like IBC, just as a starting point, the Ethereum ecosystem is actually starting to consider IBC. Like if you look at Scroll, they had that announcement with Union. If you look at Georgios's Twitter account this morning, it was like IBC Ref ? A couple weeks ago at ETH Denver and the Cake working groups, there was a lot of discussion about IBC. So people are getting interested because there's this standardized protocol that's trust minimized for interoperability, right? And there is a desire to decrease the fragmentation of liquidity throughout some of these ecosystems, which I think the previous presentation kind of highlighted and touched on, right? And IBC is this great tool. But this has taken many years, right, to get to this point into this standard and to coalesce around this. Now we are kind of like moving faster and accelerating in the age of artificial intelligence and in blockchain development. But whether or not we're able to like get people to adopt the NOMA protocol stack remains to be seen. I think a lot of it will depend on how we communicate it with people and also to the use case. If we're able to prove and get feedback and iterate, so like if we had like, let's say a hackathon and developers were able to use it and play with it and give us feedback, then we can like see if we can incorporate some of that feedback, see what works, see what doesn't work. So there's still a lot to be tested out and a lot of details to be worked out. But I think it boils down to more of a coordination problem than an actual technical problem.
Did you guys experience any of the other coordinations issues in the Cosmos Hub or like in just like participating as a Chorus One in general, or like also in Cronos? Just curious.
Like what coordination issues?
Because like Apiori just mentioned about how he had issues with the coordinations issues. Just curious, like of your experiences, because I know you have a lot of experiences on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is in general like a big challenge in the Cosmos ecosystem where, the advantage is it's very, it's very decentralized, right? We have a lot of different parties that contribute to the development. But then, of course, even the coordination between, IBC and the Cosmos SDK and Comet BFT and, the Cosmos Hub and all of these different teams is like, it's a huge challenge. And then I think you kind of multiply that when you talk about bringing it to other ecosystems as well. So I do think that's a big challenge. I think one thing that's very cool, especially when you talk about IBC, is that you have other teams now that are really focusing on making IBC this, powerful interoperability standard for non-Cosmos chains as well. So like teams like Union or Polymer, and I think I really hope that. I think that's also one of the great advantages about IBC is that you have these different teams that can now build their own products and own protocols on top of it, which is quite different from, I think, all of the competitors to IBC, where it's basically, like one team building more of a closed product as opposed to open protocol. Also, of course, generally like with worse trust assumptions. So I do think there's a good chance that IBC manages to kind of, permeate the entire crypto ecosystem beyond just Cosmos, but it's still early and still to be seen.
Do you have any experiences in?
Not too much on our side. I think like we're one of the chains that benefit a lot from the open source community from Cosmos. And over time, like we also are kind of contributing back to the ecosystem, and also especially on the things that we're using, right? Like for example, the EVM module. So we're very open to collaborate with other chains who are kind of leveraging the same software piece and make it like a public good for everyone.
Thanks for your answers. So when you guys all mentioned IBC, and like bridges are what's always being compared with IBC, right? So I'm just also curious, how do you think we get alignments in bridging interfaces?
Sure. I mean, I think part of it comes down to communities have to be willing to be firm about, what risks and trade-offs exist. Like I think, for example, L2Beat on Ethereum, or managed by some folks that are in the Ethereum community, Bartek and others, it does a fantastic job of kind of highlighting what these risks are. And if your bridge is a multi-sig, if it's a 3 of 5 multi-sig, if it's governance controlled, if it's not governance controlled, how much value is locked in there. And as we've seen, like in the bridging ecosystem over the last couple of years, and I think the most recent big one was the multichain one, there's just a lot of risks associated with locking your funds in a multisig. And I think this is why people are starting to consider things like IBC, because you have this trust minimized verification. Now, with rollups, do you get instant finality? No. So I think things like ZK snarks are really going to help. If you look at like Polygon's ag layer, like this is like one idea around that direction. If you look at things like Ethereum's block times are 12 seconds, and it takes about 13 minutes to get finality. So if you actually want finality on an IBC transfer, it would take about 13 minutes. You can do like some eigenlayer restaking fancy single slot finality gadget thing, but even so, like if you actually want real Ethereum finality, it's going to take about 13 minutes there. So if there are rollups that integrate things like IBC and there are ZK rollups with succinct proofs, I think Starknet's looking at this. Maybe that serves as somewhat of a gateway. Maybe protocols like Namada, don't mean to shill, but where it has like an IBC connection and then it has a custom bridge to Ethereum. So maybe you can get the best of both worlds there. But it's not a Validium, so you're not getting that succinctness verification on chain. So there is still like a bit of trust in the Namada validator set. So there's not really a perfect solution as they exist today.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think in the end, I think what Mary mentioned before, I think is a huge factor too. It's just that, at this point, there's the most volume. IBC is like the bridging protocol or interoperability protocol that is like the most volume, the most proven, not being hacked. So I think that's a huge factor. And I think that should be like very helpful also in getting it to other ecosystems. And then I think it does require probably relying quite a bit on, particular teams that have, built something around it, and then also have the kind of, BD partnership incentive and resources to do that. Because I think that's, of course, the other kind of downside of the Cosmos or of the IBC approach, because there's no native monetization. There's kind of not really, if you compare like the resources that go into, IBC adoption with, I don't know, Wormhole or like Layer 0, those things, it's like tiny in comparison. So I think it's hard to compete on that front, but then I think we have like other advantages. And then I think it's great, if you have other teams that are building something on top and then kind of like still using IBC, but kind of can also do that kind of business development, partnership, integration work.
Yeah, I think from the chain perspective, we're agnostic in terms of what bridge technology is powering it. But we do look at different security assumptions, and we do internal audit to evaluate different options. And at this stage, I think it's really hard to say like which one is going to be the winner. So we really trying to work on the interface part, trying like in terms of like coordination, right? A simple example is like the assets. So, it's quite common that, you have different versions of the same assets on the same chain, and that just become a UX nightmare, right? And then users will get confused and they might even get their funds lost with that. So that requires coordination between maybe the foundation, the bridge partner, and the dApps that are adopting those assets. I think those are quite important. And then another aspect I kind of touched upon earlier is the wallet, which is the interface for retail users accessing those assets and dApps. So for us, because we have the strategic partnerships with Crypto.com, what's interesting about our users is we find that almost half of our users accessing Cronos-based apps using Crypto.com DeFi wallet, which is their non-custodial wallet instead of MetaMask. So we work very closely with their team to make sure that users is able to bridge assets in and out using various methods, right? Underneath, some are powered by layer 0, some are powered by centralized exchange approach and a few other bridge partners, for example. And hopefully they will be supporting Cosmos API as well. So I think those are the things that we really focus on. Like, we don't pick and choose the underlying bridge partner, but really provide the interface that's easy to use for our end users.
Just because you mentioned, I think as far as I know, the Cronos's solo machine bridges, just want to tackle that. Just curious, how did Cronos find implementing the solo machine bridge for getting XLM to Crypto.com? Just curious.
Right, yeah. So the background of this is because we see most of our users coming from Crypto.com. Crypto.com users love to trade assets such as XRP, Cardano, Doge, Sheep, for example, right? Which is very different from the user base you would see on other like Ethereum or Layer 2s or Cosmos. We also heard from our Cronos users that they want those assets on Cronos apps. So now we explore what are the options to bring those assets on chain. So Crypto.com, as a licensed exchange, they decided to mint those tokens on Cronos POS chain, used to be called Crypto.org chain, with Solo Machine, so that those assets can be interoperable among various IBC-enabled chains. And then Cronos IBC'd over those assets onto the Cronos side and then map it to the EVM level so that those assets now can be traded on the DEX, can be traded on the perpetual on exchange on Cronos. So that's kind of how the thinking behind it and why they choose the solo machine. And I think now because it's issued with solo machine, it can be also be ported to other IBC enabled chains. So if any of the Cosmos chains are interested in enabling those assets, it's they're open to do that as well. So yeah, it's an interesting example to kind of combine the centralized exchange with decentralized applications.
For sure. Then let's talk about IBC and intent as well, Brian and Apiori. Just curious, how are you guys going to get Solana or ETH rollups or these days Bitcoin L2s to use IBC or intents?
Here's the intents.
So for intents, Christopher Goes just released a post on ETH Research earlier in the week titled ANOMA is a universal intent machine for Ethereum. And basically it was a proposal to the Ethereum community to suggest what affordances ANOMA could offer. And from an implementation perspective, the way that you would implement this is that you would have nodes in the Ethereum network would run the ANOMA protocol as a sidecar. And then on-chain, you would have some type of adapter, and that adapter would emulate the ANOMA resource machine. And it would also be able to verify succinct proofs about things that happen on ANOMA. One way, which I think might be interesting to think about ANOMA, I was thinking about it last night because it's the 25th anniversary of the matrix being released. It's kind of like a node is kind of like plugging into the matrix, and they can do all these superpowers while they're in the matrix and they're in ANOMA land. But then when they come out of the matrix, they can still reason about things that happened in ANOMA land, and then they could update their state on their underlying blockchain. So I think this is kind of a useful mental model on necessarily how to think about it. It's not maybe technically precise, but from an analogy, just for a broader audience, I think it might be helpful. I think intents are cool because they allow you to make credible commitments over preferences or constraints over possible state transitions. So basically you can define what you want rather than signing some execution trace on how to get there. And you might say something like, well, I'm willing to trade ETH for USDC as long as it settles somewhere in the Ethereum ecosystem, right? So that might mean like ETH and like 30 different rollups you're okay with receiving USDC on, because really your trust assumption there is with Circle. It's not really with the particular rollup, because you could always redeem that with Circle. If Circle didn't redeem a particular rollup's USDC, there would probably be a problem for Circle, right? And this is really nice. But the other thing you could put as a constraint or a preference in your intent is like, I'm only willing to do atomic execution on Ethereum or only on Solana or something like this. So in order to implement something like this, you would need to have a sidecar protocol, and you would need opt-in from different node operators within these ecosystems, like Chorus One, and then you would need some type of on-chain adapter to make this happen. So the implementation details we still have to work out. We're very early stage on that particular piece, but I think if there's a value proposition and we can prove that, then just like IBC, people will want to use it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about the connection between IBC and intents. I'm actually very curious about that. But, I mean, intents at least seems to be in principle, you know, I guess the thing that you asked in the beginning about sort of abstracting away where users are, I mean, I think intents seem like the perfect direction to go there, right? Where you can basically say, okay, this is what I want. This is sort of the outcome that I want. And then you define that, and then sort of things, you know, take care underneath the hood. So I think from that perspective that, you know, that feels like a really promising direction to get both maybe a relatively high degree of security and also the sort of abstraction that users can, like, becomes more user friendly and they have to worry less about sort of what exactly happens underneath the hood.
I think almost time, so just want to wrap up with my last question. I think we mostly talked about, so there were two parts of this panel, right? So the first one was the how it lays to the groundwork for abstraction, but I think we haven't really tackled the true mass adoption part yet. Just curious, if you guys, what are like your strategies on aiming for the mass adoption on HE ecosystems?
I mean, I was talking with Adrian earlier, and I said it's really important that we get intent-based meme coins.
Like that?
Scale free money. Mass adoption, I think that's, we have to prove use cases, right? A couple of the applications that we've outlined are something called Public Signal, which is basically a demand-sided version of Kickstarter. So an intent-centric Kickstarter where people could come together and actually like tell an entrepreneur what they want built, which is really cool and turns the game on its head a bit. Another one is multi-chat, which is like an encrypted Slack-like application, but you can have different interfaces. So it could be more like Signal, it could be like Telegram. It would really be up to the developer to choose. Another one is this idea of scale-free money, which would allow people to issue money to each other. And you could think of it more like a mutual credit network, which there's a lot of literature and history, which you can read about that. So I think these types of applications, which can prove use cases, sure, but there also will be like a certain amount of like dejetting that still onboards people because people are interested in trading things. One point though I think is really interesting though is like, if you look at ANOMA from an architectural perspective, we come at a lot of these problems from a very top-down perspective. But if you look at like a lot of the things that IBC and the ecosystem that's developed around it, it comes at things from a very more of a bottom-up perspective and incrementally adding more features each time. And if you look at protocols like Agoric with orchestration and things like this, I think at some point we probably will see somewhat of a convergence between these tracks. But it's going to be a matter of years before that happens. And in the meantime, I think it really will depend on what are the applications and use cases that get people to want to try crypto. And, can we survive another bear market? Like, are there applications that people will use like friend tech or something, even in a bear market?
Yeah, I think use case, as you mentioned, and also yield, right? And it's interesting to see now more and more even centralized exchanges are now offering decentralized products with their like own non-custodial wallet, Binance, OKX, Bybit, Crypto.com, etc. So I think this is a good path to kind of educate the users who already have crypto, but it's like sitting on a centralized exchange, to let them explore and discover, oh, like I already have this assets, but it's sitting on my centralized exchange account. But look, I can get like a lot more yield if I just change a toggle and then deposit, stake in some DeFi protocols on non-custodial wallet. So I think this is definitely a good direction to start to change people who already have exposure to crypto into Web3 users. And it's interesting that we're in Korea, where it's probably highest percentage of population actually have crypto, but in terms of Web3 adoption, it's quite low, right? So how can we kind of work with those centralized party like exchanges, for example, to kind of onboard those users into Web3? I think that's a kind of a good path for mass adoption.
Sweet. Thank you so much for answering a lot of my questions, guys. Because we have amazing panelists, do you guys have any questions from the audience? If not, I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.